Hi everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome to my shop. I had some pretty big logs on the sawmill last week. I had a big oak, maple, and walnut, a big white oak, and I'm going to cover that oak here for the first part of the video. This tree blew over in a storm and it was pretty straight. We're going to get about 3 logs out of it, between 8 and 9 feet each, and the last log, there'd be a little bit of a crook in it, but not too bad. And it was about 24 inches at the base, which is kind of going to max out, not necessarily my sawmill, but my ability to handle it. White oak is quite heavy. This is 24-inch diameter, 10-foot log. It's going to weigh about 2,000 pounds, and that kind of maxes out my ability to handle it. When this tree blew over, it pulled up the root ball, so we're pretty sure that when we cut enough of this tree away, that root ball was going to stand up, and we didn't want a good portion of the tree standing up with it. So the first cut we did was at the base of the tree, so that root ball would fall or go up and not take a good portion of the tree with it. I've always wanted to cut a log like this, so I can check this off my bucket list. Once we cut off the root ball, we cut the rest of the tree into 3 different sections, and each log was about 8 to 9 feet each. This was also going to be a good test of my fairly new logging arch. I designed it with this tree in mind, not necessarily this particular tree, but a white oak that's 24 inches in diameter, being about a ton for a 10-foot log. So this was going to be a good test for it, and I gotta say it worked very well. We loaded up the first 2 logs with it, pulled the 3rd log out of the forest there, and then we used a different trailer to carry that 3rd log. It doesn't always go this well loading up logs onto the trailer. I had a few issues loading up some walnut logs that were in my driveway.
Watch out! Help!
Oh my God. The only thing hurt was my pride, and after that last fall, I think I just curled up there and had a bit of a nap. The next challenge is getting the logs off of the trailer, and I go to my buddy James's house where I use the sawmill, and he has a tractor with a lifting capacity of about 1,600 pounds. Take away the weight of the grapple and the fact that it's leveraged out of there a little bit, and it's probably going to be a bit less than that. But we had to drag the logs off of the trailer, and then we just kind of scoot them along the ground and stack them over next to some other logs. Once the time came to actually load the logs onto the sawmill, this is actually one of the shorter white oaks. It's just over 8 foot and not quite 24 inches, but I've got these ramps for manually loading logs onto the sawmill, and they're pretty handy for James just to kind of push that log up those ramps to take some of the strain off of the tractor. And there's a certain point there where the grapple starts to come close to the tire, so we just grab a couple of cant hooks and then roll the log the rest of the way onto the sawmill. Here we are just shimming up the tree so that the pith, or the center of the rings, not necessarily the center of the tree, but the center of the rings is called the pith. You want that to be parallel to the bed of the sawmill. So we just shim that up, and then we'll start our first cuts. So once I made that first cut, I normally would just rotate the log 90 degrees, but unfortunately this log is so heavy that we can't roll it. So James picked it up And what we did is we rolled it 180 degrees, and we'll make that second cut to see if we can just get rid of some more weight. And after that second cut, it was still too heavy, so we used the straps to pick up one half of it, and then we rotated it with the cant hooks. And we rotated 90 degrees against those squaring jigs, make that third cut, again rotated 180, and then I made my last cut, and then I ended up with what's called a cant. This was about 15 inches by 15 inches square. Originally I wanted to cut each piece of this log about an inch thick, but I made it a bit thicker, about 1.25 inches or 5/4 thickness. Hopefully that extra thickness will help it stay flat during the drying process. And just to be most efficient with time, what we'll do is we'll just pick up all the pieces of lumber at once with the straps. We'll put it in the back of the trailer. Once I get home, I'll separate each piece, clean off all that sawdust, sticker, and stack them. And you can see here I'm putting it next to a pretty big stack of walnut that we cut earlier. And then we had a maple log, pretty big one. I didn't actually realize, but this was a crotch piece, so we were just rotating it a little bit there just so that that crotch section would be horizontal, and it looks quite nice. But my GoPro ran out of battery or memory or something, so I don't have all this, and we'll go right into the cleaning. Once I get the trailer home, I separate each piece of lumber and I start rinsing all that sawdust off of it. This is an important step because you really need to get rid of that sawdust because it will hold moisture against the wood and really slow down the drying process. I haven't had much luck with maple in the past. It either warps really bad on me, or I had a couple of logs that I really got a lot of mildew on them during the drying process. This particular log was cut down during the winter, so I'm hoping that the sugar content in the log wasn't that high, and maybe I'll avoid some of that mildew. You can also see that this doesn't really look like your typical maple. I think most people are used to hard maple, and with that it's the sapwood, which is that nice white looking wood. This is pretty typical for the maple that we get around here. But kind of finish up the shot here with that nice crotch area figure. I think I'll make some really nice pieces. The walnut log had some rot going up the center that was probably caused by carpenter ants. That's most typically what we see around here. But it's the same process, just get rid of that sawdust before stacking and stickering it. This is about half that stack of walnut. There's no figure in it. It's not very clear, but when it's dry and I start selling it, I price it accordingly. Now I have to admit that I am terrible for being able to tell red oak and white oak apart. And halfway through the rinsing of this log, I started to wonder if this was red oak or white oak because it was looking pretty red. There are a couple methods I use for telling the difference between the red and the white oaks. One, the leaves are quite obvious, but if you don't have access to the leaves, like this tree fell down over the winter, so there were no leaves. But if you look at the bark itself, the bark on this tree was quite white. And then also if you look at the end grain, it's also quite different. Red oak has very hollow end grain, and white oak is usually filled. It's filled with a substance called tylosis, although not all white oaks have that tylosis filling the pores. So that's just a few of the methods I use to determine between red and white oak in my shop, because the coloring can be quite close between the two at times. Once everything is stickered and stacked, it's going to be there for a while. White oak really holds on to its moisture, so it's going to be a while before I put it through my solar kiln. But thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, and we'll see you next time.